the universe, through some miracle, through my boss at the time, who I went to see to say, I'm not enjoying work at the moment. And he said, you should see my coach. And I said, I can't afford to see your coach. And he said, it's okay, I'll pay for you. And I went along and I met that coach. And in that first session, she asked me a question. And that is, when did you last experience joy? And I said, what are you talking about? I'm a happy person. And she said, I didn't ask you that. I asked when you last felt joy. And when I realized 3 months later that I had to meet my ex-husband, she was one of the first people that I called. That is a big part of the fact that I'm a coach today, because I know how much we get in our own way. And I know the power of having somebody push the right buttons, ask the right questions that really make you then make the changes in your life that you might need to make.
Welcome back to the Adam Experiment, where we explore how to unlock more of our full potential. I'm your host, Adam Hoffman, and today you get to meet my new friend, Ruth Penfold-Brown. Her mission is to empower women in HR to reclaim their confidence, take up space, and manifest their dream career. But in our conversation today, we're going to go so far beyond that, and I can't wait to share more of that with you. But first, a little bit about Ruth. So you're going to hear her story of rapidly rising the ranks in the corporate world as a leader and chief people officer with companies like Shazam, Onfido, and BP Launchpad. She shares openly about how she grew up watching the women around her struggle and sacrifice, and how that sort of became her own operating model. And then something clicked, and her career took off. And that was when she decided to claim ownership of her life and that career. Then some major life changes started happening for her, and she had another awakening, which led to what she does now in Bloom. The Bloom Method is a leadership accelerator and community for women, and the step-by-step process she uses to empower women to reclaim themselves, their confidence, and create a whole new experience of work. And as you'll find out through her story, it's a lot more than just work in what she does. So some of my favorite topics from this episode are an exploration around what does it actually mean to wake up and what that looked like for Ruth, what she learned. We'll talk about how listening to your body and paying attention to signs of discomfort or imbalance can be crucial to opening up more of that personal growth. We're going to explore what it looks like to continuously self-audit and unlearn from all the societal conditioning that we've experienced to help you live more authentically and in alignment. We also cover things like the importance of finding space for stillness, setting boundaries, experimentation, tattoos, and a little bit of everything else. I do want to let you know that Ruth shares openly about ending an abusive relationship, and I just share that to be transparent if that topic might be triggering to anyone listening. All right, with that, let's meet Ruth. All right, Ruth, I am so excited to have you joining me here today. I can't wait to get into our conversation. Welcome.
Thank you, Adam. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I love if you're not watching this live, she's almost dancing back and forth.
It was like a woohoo, we're getting in.
It's a good way to get started. And honestly, I had a couple things listed out to get going, but I just noticed something. I think it's your left wrist. Is that a tattoo or a special mark that's there? Does that have any meaning, or did I make that up? Oh, both of them, I guess. Yes.
Okay, so this one is actually probably the most significant tattoo. It looks like a wonky circle. It is actually not wonky, but it's the human body. We are wonky, right? There you go. Just about a circle there. So I was in, we're going to start quite deep, gang. Okay. So
shocking.
So this was a tattoo that I had done after I left my ex-husband. I was in a relationship for 12 years that was codependent and therefore abusive. And when I left, and I realized the ways that I had stayed in it and let myself be manipulated to stay in it. The best visual representation I had of that to hold on to was an unbroken circle. The idea that we are complete in and of ourselves. We don't need other humans to complete us, but we should, healthy humans do want to be with other humans. But it should be unbroken, because what happens in an abusive relationship, and for anybody listening, be aware, if you have cracks in your circle, it's very easy for some humans to learn where those cracks are and use those cracks as a way of getting back into your life and staying in your life. So this was a very, very big deal when I had it done. Very important. This one is a symbol of fertility, but more like new beginnings and things like that versus actual babies and things like that. But I went through a bit of a time, Adam, after said divorce, which is about 14 years ago now, but probably 12 years ago, I went through a bit of a tattoo phase.
Do you have any plans for new tattoos?
I actually don't. Do you have tattoos?
No. Not yet. I have a big vision for a tattoo. It'll be a project. I was going to make a joke after you shared with us all the lovely things that you just shared and be like, all right, good. I think the podcast is over. Like, episode done, wisdom dropped. Everybody got what they need. Just a reminder, you're already whole. You have everything that you already need.
Yeah. In summary, okay, we're done.
Yeah. Jesus. We just fast forwarded and did in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Tattoo. Yeah. I think when we were talking originally about reinvention and whatnot, my tattoo started coming to me a couple of years ago, where I was like, I want to get something, but I don't know what it is. I never ever wanted to get a tattoo before. And then one day I just had this vision for, I guess, my version of the rebirth cycle, if you will. And so what it's going to be is, I have a name for it. It's like the infinite love reactor, I think is what I called it. And so it starts over my heart. So like my left chest. And it's like the universe kind of like is the beginning, right? So this is where all the energy begins in me, and it starts to expand out and then sort of like goes up my shoulder. Probably there's like a phoenix there into the sky, and then eventually like comes down sort of like forests, mountains, water, all the way to like down my wrist, where it's like grounding in the earth, so that I always have like the expansiveness of the universe and love, as well as the groundedness. And so it's just a reminder to embrace all of it. So anyways, big project to go from full sort of chest, full sleeve down. And yeah, it'll be a piece. I got to find the right artist. That's what I've been on the lookout for.
Yeah. See, I did end up with I know how many tattoos I have, because a friend's child counted them on, we call them holiday, vacation, right? 16 I have, but they are all quite small. So it doesn't look like, you wouldn't look at me and go, wow, she's got a lot of tattoos. You're like, it's more like, what are that? Like people just tend to, and I forget they're there. So it's like, oh, that means this thing is whatever meaning I attached to it at the time. And here we are today. These ones here, I call them my, when people ask me about them, which someone did the other day, I just said they're my washing instructions.
That's honestly, so I was like, oh, those are interesting. So she just lifted up her arm, and basically on her tricep, it's a bunch of triangles. That was what I quickly saw. Yeah,
that's it. All different kinds. And I was like, yeah, these are my washing instructions. And he was like, okay.
You're like, great. Now get back to tattooing.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness. All right. So we covered tattoos and went deep real fast. One thing that you said when we connected was that you woke up at 30. Can you talk about what waking up means to you?
Oh, yeah. Wow. That's a great question. So I would say that, like many people, I was sleepwalking in my life, and, I fell into lots of things, fell into a job in recruitment, fell into the wrong kind of relationship, and being a human who, as a child, had learned that I wasn't enough, meant that I had a drive, and a sort of incessant drive to be enough. And so that made me overachieve in some really negative ways, namely being able to stay in a marriage that really wasn't a good marriage for 12 years, right? And keep going and keep going and keep trying and keep investing and keep going and keep believing and whatever. And so my actual awakening started from about the age of 27, so 3 years before I actually left the ex-husband. And I would best describe it as a series of fortunate events, right? I met someone who remains one of my closest friends today, and she just sort of bashed into my world, and she rudely loved herself. Now, I thought she was insane, but thank goodness her demonstration of self-worth arrived into my ecosystem because it gave me this little nugget of inspiration. And because of the inspiration she provided, I left the job that I'd been in, went to another job, did Weight Watchers, lost 40 pounds in that job. And this was when I was about 28. And then it was another 2 years until I decided to stop turning a blind eye to everything that I'd been turning a blind eye to in the relationship that I'd been in. And I left. Now, I make that sound like a really quick thing, and it really wasn't, even though I said it took me 3 years. In reality, it was if anybody's listening who is in sort of codependent or controlling relationship with another human, they are very hard things to leave from. You can't trivialize it in any way. But I left because the universe, through some miracle, through my boss at the time, who I went to see to say, I'm not enjoying work at the moment. And he said, you should see my coach. And I said, I can't afford to see your coach, because I really couldn't in those days. And he said, it's okay, I'll pay for you. And I went along and I met that coach. And in that first session, she asked me a question, which I will never forget. And that is, when did you last experience joy? And I said, what are you talking about? I'm a happy person. And she said, I didn't ask you that. I asked when you last felt joy. And on a brain level, I was like, she's crazy. I left. I didn't go back for 3 months. But on a soul level, I knew what she meant. And when I realized 3 months later that I had to meet my ex-husband, she was one of the first people that I called. And that is a big reason, that is a big part of the fact that I'm a coach today, because I know how much we get in our own way. And I know the power of having somebody push the right buttons, ask the right questions that really make you then make the changes in your life that you might need to make.
You said that you knew it in your soul. At the time, would you have described it that way? Or is this sort of something that you've added on later on? And in any case, what is that? How could somebody feel that or tap into that? Or how did you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's not an understanding I would have ever been able to fathom at the time. But I think, when you reflect on circumstances, you have to think about, like, the fact that I still remember the question that she asked me is a really big sign, right? And the fact is that I think on some deep level, I knew that I'd been deeply unhappy for a very long time. And I hadn't been able to face that because I'd been masking it by people pleasing, by trying to be a fun, friendly person to be around. And I didn't know. It's only really as I've advanced into my 40s that I realized just how much of my personality was, in fact, a performance, right? A series of ways of being that I learned to create safety for myself in the environment that I found myself in. In sort of psychology terms, they speak about them in terms of creating an adaptation to who you actually are that keeps you safe in an environment that you're in, and some of those adaptations may still serve you today, but some of them don't. And so then the process for most of us, I think, regardless of where we sit on the trauma spectrum, is, it's this, we begin this process of unlearning everything that we learnt and then unraveling it all and seeing who we actually are really underneath. all of those masks.
Yeah. So far, what we've talked through is you've had a series of events that you start to kind of wake up, become aware of where things are at. You've started to make some changes with yourself. You mentioned your journey with Weight Watchers, which congratulations, incredible. And then the work that you did in your relationship, also for yourself. And I'm assuming at that point in time, you kept pulling the threads, I think is the term that you used at one point in time. Yeah. So what came next?
So I just I'd physically left, right? And then it's like you find yourself out in the world, and I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I liked. I didn't know anything about myself at all. So it's literally brick by brick, piece by piece. Who am I, right? And actually trying on different things. Like, does this work? Does this fit? Is this who I am? So I sort of worked my way through. There's no one single thing. And I think this is where a lot of people approach wellness in a slightly wrong way, which is there is no one thing that's gonna, like, everybody is their own individual, unique thing. And what your job is as the human in the middle of it all is to, really ingest all the brilliant things around you and filter through it and decide what actually works for you. So, in that space, I would have worked with that coach that I worked with for a bit longer. I would have made sure that I was certainly aligning myself with humans who I felt like were living as themselves, and trying to walk alongside them and see what I could learn from that too, which some people might call networking. If I saw somebody doing something that looked cool, but it wasn't quite so calculated is kind of what I mean. It wasn't like, I'm going to network and see where my life goes. It was, okay, that person looks like they're actually having a nice time. Let me find out about them and what they're doing. And actually having that curious, collaborative, outreachy approach to how I was building myself meant that doors did open and people did say, hey, do you want to come and do this thing? Or, hey, do you want to, right? But all the time, I was kind of in this process of, and I guess the way that I live even today, Adam, I would describe as living in a continuous state of audit, right? Where I am constantly being bold enough to ask the question, does this thing that may have once been good still serve me in this moment right now, right? So that I'm constantly keeping myself honest about what's in integrity and what isn't, and really staying true to my mission. And my only real mission in this life is to really live as the fullest version of myself to the best of my ability. And each year I look back on the versions that I thought were full and I go, oh, that's okay, Ruth, I love you so much. And you, but now we've learned something a little bit different now in this season. And this season and then next season it will be like, okay, that was cute or not. Now where else can we go? So yeah, it really is an emergent process, a forever emergent process.
Yeah, and you've embraced it, right? That's been your approach, is to say, hey, I'm going to try on new things, and especially when things maybe don't feel right. Can you talk about what that means to you a little bit? Like when you get the sense that, hey, maybe this thing isn't serving me anymore. Is that a feeling? Is it a thought that you have? How does that come up? And then what happens next?
Gosh. So, I think that we're very clever creatures. Like our whole ecosystem of human is very clever within ourselves, right? So if you pay attention, you might see things in your dreams that are telling you what's going on in your life if you're paying attention. If you're paying attention, you may notice that you're having some challenges in a particular part of your body, and it's telling you that you've got something that you might need to look at, right? So for me, I know that my nervous system literally starts to pull me up by the scruff of my neck like a puppy being pulled around by right? It's like literally like, come on, you got something to look at here, right? it might be that even though I'm not really knocking myself on anything, I notice that I'm getting a few bruises. And I'm like, oh, hang on, what's going on? Like something's out of kilter, right? So, I mean, I think there's lots of ways that we give ourselves smoke signals to say something isn't okay, even before the brain is actually ready to admit it yet, is what I would say. And certainly, I mean, gosh, even at the time that I was leaving my ex-husband 14 years ago, I was having chest pains. I was having all kinds of things. Oh, I don't feel very well. Goodness me, let me go to the doctor. No, what's not right here? What do I need to change? Or, hey, my digestion isn't as good as it could be. How am I eating? Am I eating in alignment with myself right now? Or do I need to change? Like, it doesn't have to be big, life-changing, leave your partner type decisions. It could literally be like, am I drinking the right kind of tea? Am I doing your body is telling you what it does and doesn't want all of the time. It's just up to you as the owner of that body, as the person driving the vehicle, whether you want to pay attention to what it's saying.
And this particular, let's call it a skill that you have to do this, is this something that did you go to training for? Did it just kind of emerge naturally? Where did it come from?
I think it was a series of fortunate events. It's like so many of these things. It's like nothing I think in any of us comes from any one source, really. So, there is, it might be that I read a book on something that made me start to pay attention to something. There's some great books on, there's The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. There's You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. These books that tell you what you actually have the power to do in yourself. But truthfully, the only way that ever becomes something that's not just, okay, cool story, bro, is actually when you slow down enough to feel some of your feelings and feel what's happening in your body. And only then are you then able to go, okay, actually, there might be something here. There might be something here for me to pay attention to. So I would say, though, I'm not a special, unique human. I'm just a human that is prepared to listen to what those signs are. A lot of people talk about it, but it's not necessarily to be in it, particularly if you, like many of us, have had traumatic experiences that make you want to run away from sitting still. Everything in our society drives us towards motion and being disconnected. So you have to find what works for you in order to be able to hear yourself. It's not as simple as just sit still for most of us.
Yeah.
What's good for you to get still?
Trying lots of things. Actually, it's a great question. I appreciate you asking. My number one thing for being still is being outside in nature. If I want to just cut through real fast, that's it. Get out into some big trees, which is why I love living in Seattle so much now, is it's so easy for that to happen. Or even just in the mornings in the city, one of my favorite things to do is I've been waking up earlier now in this season of my life, and I have a gym at this building that I live in. It's 8 floors down from me, but I also have access to a gym that's a 15-minute walk. And I go walk to that gym as often as I possibly can, because that walk is just, it's stillness, even though I'm in a city and there's a lot going on and there's definitely some characters on the street at that time in the morning. But the insights that come for me, that's when I can actually hear the deeper stuff that's coming out, and the chatter goes away just enough. I've played around with meditation. I've done it aggressively for some periods of time. I've done it periodically for other, so kind of sometimes I'll pull that into my repertoire. Just some simple, even just paying attention to my breath. One thing lately that I've really enjoyed doing, that I've been experimenting with, is when I have that need to go and have some type of stimulation, meaning I'm going to go check my phone for some unnecessary reason, or flip open my email, or do some numbing escape behavior, is I just take a really deep breath. I'll just, And that just gives me a little bit of a rush right here in the front of my forehead. And I'm like, all right, cool. I'm good. That's what I needed. I'm back at it now. And then honestly, sometimes I will just literally lay down on the floor and just, that gives me a little bit of a pause. And I don't know if it's because I've just tried a whole bunch of stuff over time that regulation comes much more naturally to me. Like it takes me less effort to drop into that state of stillness. Yeah. And coming back to what you said originally, in any of those cases, I wouldn't consider myself still. I'm more just, I think of that as creating space. And so like, I literally think about the state that I was in before is like the outside. You can't see my hands if you're listening, but like the space and the energy outside of me has just sort of started constricting me down. And then what I need to do is sort of get back into my energy and my alignment and my grounding and sort of expand that space back out so that I'm like, oh, okay, there I am. Like the tightness in my chest is gone. My stomach doesn't hurt anymore. Like my brain isn't going all crazy with all sorts of silly thoughts. So I don't know. Those are a couple of my things.
Yeah, I love that. And like, I don't know, like the idea of sitting still. I mean, gosh, when I left my ex-husband, someone said to me, sit still and be with yourself. And I was like, are you high? It took another like 3 or 4 years before I could eat. And when I started meditating, it was literally like taming a wild animal. I went to do it with others at first. And then all I would do is sit for 60 seconds and I set my phone. That's how I began. And I'd just try and find my breath in my body somewhere. And then over time, that evolved to about 10 minutes, right? But these days, that practice is completely shifted for me. And I'm actually finding myself more fully in meditative movement. And I do quite a lot of Kundalini these days, which is a lot of very traditional yogic breath work, and they call Kriyas, different ways to cleanse your system and work with who you are. Lots of singing and chanting and things like that, and that's beautiful. Like I really feel like for the season of life that I'm in right now, I've found the groove of what is working for me and what's allowing me to be in my open-hearted, playful, creative, feminine energy more, rather than the sort of more rigid, because I've got masculine energy for days. I can go, do, right? Seriously can. But to actually allow this side of me to unfurl, a side of me that perhaps I masked more in order to be what I thought I needed to be successful in the more corporate world. I say corporate, knowing that anybody listening to this was like, corporate world, huh? Really? No, I was in a startup world, but then I did end up working for a company that was owned by a VP, but they did hire me because I was hella startup. But that's also why probably it didn't work out long term. And here we are today, living a magical life.
Well, so that's a good transition. I think that 90% of the conversations that I'm in right now with, I'd say, people who are in their 30s, 40s, honestly 50s as well, they're having that moment of, this career that I committed to way back when kind of isn't serving me, and I have no idea what to go and do next. And then kind of when you ask them some of those harder questions, they're like, well, what I really want to be doing is this thing over here, but that it feels so scary to go from the comfort foundation of that nice, consistent job to being a coach, becoming an author, being a writer, starting a company. So I'd love to hear your story of how you went from startup, semi part-time once, maybe corporate, global HR leader to coaching powerful women to embrace more of themselves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there you go. You kind of gave the summary, really. I mean, I throughout that journey of unfolding, the continuing journey of unfolding, I accidentally, on purpose, built a phenomenal career, right? Where I got to do some amazing stuff. I got to work with some amazing companies, and I got to build some amazing companies. You know, couple of exits, all the things that people want and, say they want and whatever. And so I worked myself into a role of Chief People Officer at BP Launchpad, where I was going to be building and investing in new and emerging energy businesses. And I really thought, wow, knowing what I've done in my own life, knowing that I've been able to take my human experience from miserable to sensational, imagine if I can do that within companies, right? Imagine if that's what we can actually give humans. Imagine if, as the HR team, or the people team, as we were calling ourselves, because it felt sexier, imagine if we can bring people back to themselves, and then, wow, then everybody's connected to their purpose and away we go. But in reality, it was really, really hard to do that. And I'll be honest with you, the bureaucracy was really, really tough for me. Around about the time that I was not having the best time, honestly, I decided to do a coaching qualification because I was like, you know what? I feel like this will make me a better leader. Plot reveal, gang. What we tend to do when we know we want something, because it's a bit safer than saying the thing we want, is we give ourselves an opportunity to step into it in like a gentle way that's non-committal. Like, oh, I'm going to do a coaching qualification to be a better leader. Code from my brain, what it was saying was, we want to be a coach, babe, and we're going to do it, right? So then the universe conspired to make it be so. Because just one act of self-claiming like that, booking the course, means that the universe goes, thank goodness I've been waiting for you to do that. Okay, let's do it. So before I knew it, I was coaching. People were asking me to start creating learning, creating a culture. I had to create a whole series of workshops on how to create a culture of innovation based on all of the experiences that I'd had. And suddenly I was like, ooh, this feels a lot better than the work I've ever done before. Wow, I might be starting to, is this what a zone of genius feels like? Wow. And so gradually, I let this new version of myself emerge again, like another moment of reinvention. And I realized as I was coaching people that, I still coach everybody. I don't just work with women, but I was noticing the same themes coming up over and over again with the women that I was working with. And I recognized all of them because they were all the ways that I have held myself back to. And so from that, I can remember a conversation in our kitchen with my husband where he said, well, what would you do if you could just do anything? And I said, well, I would empower women like me to love and value themselves sooner. Oof. And Bloom is what emerged about 6 months later when it was like, okay, well, how can I work with women? Okay, well, I know a lot about building your career. So Bloom started as a leadership accelerator, which first and foremost brings you back to who you are, then helps you love who that is and helps you bring that authentically into the workplace, and then helps you really create a career that feels good from the inside out. And where you learn how to work sustainably and banish burnout and say no, and all the things that so many of us struggle to do, to self-advocate, to ask for more. And so it really, you can probably tell by how I'm talking about it, it really does feel like, everything that I lived and experienced was exactly for this reason, to be able to provide this platform for other women to be able to get there sooner and to be able to claim themselves more fully and earlier than I did in my own life. And so, yeah, I would just say there's a lot of trust in the universe and flowing in that story too, though. So, my guess is that if you're listening to this thinking, ooh, what might I want to do? Somewhere in the whisper of your soul, you probably already know what that is. I don't know, Adam, what do you think?
I'm with you. The answer is always there. I think there is something to be said about timing, though, right? And there's, you put it beautifully about like, you were right, or that's not what I meant to say. You put it really beautifully in that all the stuff that you had done up until that point in time had prepared you for that moment to bloom. And I got an email from a really close friend last night, sent it out to his newsletter, and I was reading it, and I was like, no, he's ready for this right now. He is this thing. And he had been talking about how he's been working on himself and there's, all this stuff and he still has a long way to go. And it's like all of that can be true. And you are 100% ready to go step into this thing. And I know you know exactly what it is, man. And I've seen this since the day that I met you. So like, it's time to go. And I think that that's the case for most people when they reach these points of transition. And I believe that there's some care that needs to go into not rushing it, not forcing it to exist. The way that you were telling your story, to me, it felt like you were almost being pulled into it, almost like you didn't have a choice. Whereas maybe there have been other things that you've done in your life where you've just tried to force and make them happen, like creating this culture of fully unlocked, unleashed human self-expressed people that the organization was like, no. You're like, well, I'm going to push harder. And then you're like, you know what? I'm not going to push anymore, but I'm going to just make this little opening over here. And I forget how you put it. The universe responded with like, oh, finally. Thank you.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Yeah. And you're so right. Because there's so many things in my career where I was trying to force something and it wasn't. And I was frustrated at the time and it was annoying. But then you look back and then you go, okay, yeah, that was wonderful. But to your point, I actually, the idea of doing coaching had been popping in for me since probably about 2014, 2015. And, what are we now, 2024? And I started coaching in 2022 or at the end of 2021 even, right? So there was a long whisper. There was a long lead time. And we shouldn't skip over that part because, those whispers, I think they get louder when you're ready to, when on some level you're ready to actually step into it, right? And so I'm no different to you. If there are things even now that tap me on the shoulder and I'm like, yeah, all right, we're not there yet, yeah. And that's part of the design. That's a curiosity that maybe you'll end up going into. But I don't know. I think now that I've got more evidence of times where the no's have turned into something, into an amazing yes in another way. Now it gives me, I can't say that I have evolved past my humanity of living in frustration when things are happening, but I can say that I am definitely a lot better at seeing the grace in different situations and being like, okay, so what is it what's here for me to learn, and actually using it to inform where I take things next versus, oh, I got to know that means that I shouldn't be doing this at all.
Yeah. What role do you think boundaries plays in keeping or creating space to be able to hear those yeses? And what's coming up for me is that, I don't know, I think I'm like most humans where I have a lovely ability to overcommit on command and not set boundaries. And I'm getting much better at it. And what I found personally is that when I'm better at setting my boundaries, there's more space to hear those whispers and for that other stuff to emerge. So do you coach people on, or how do you coach people to set better boundaries or just to set them in the first place?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And the truth is unfortunately, one size doesn't fit all, right? We have to be hyper aware of what it is that it takes for us to thrive and be prepared to be experimental with what that looks like. And so one of the things that we learn in Bloom is actually kind of like I didn't invent agile, but kind of like an agile approach to life, right? Where I teach experiment design. So ideally, we have the energy of experimentation, which really helps if you're a perfectionist too, because then it's like, oh, I tried a thing becomes better than, I got this thing, it had to be perfect. We're trying to learn that good enough is better than perfect, right? So first of all, we start with what are the different, what is burnout really? And what are the stages and how can you be aware of it when it's creeping? And by the way, regardless of whether you're just feeling like you're starting to step away from your values or you're starting to withdraw a little bit and, give a bit too much here and make trade-offs, or wherever you are, creating space is the tonic the whole way through. So if you're like, ooh, something doesn't feel right, create some space and then let yourself have the space to think about, okay, what could be done better? So first of all, being aware of what burnout can look like and is really important. The next thing is to be looking at obviously the structure of your life. I have like a self-care audit, which again, it's not a one size fits all. Some of the things resonate, some of them don't, but it's a starting point for people to go, am I doing enough of the things that serve me in my life? Right. And then, do a bit of a brainstorm. So I talk about the sort of the 4 C's of wellness being consistency, connection, community, and can't remember my other C now because obviously I'm trying to tell you them all at once and my brain's like ADHD. Nope. But you get the point. You brainstorm across those quadrants and go, okay, so connection. And what I mean by that is how do I connect to myself? Okay. So if I'm thinking about how can I connect to myself, what are 3 ideas that I could have around connecting to myself more? Okay, great. But then from that whole brainstorm across all of those areas, you pick one thing. Because one of my favorite sayings of all time is, don't try to swallow the watermelon whole. Cut it into slices. So yes, we could all try and do all of the things. And the reason why a lot of people don't get off the ground with feeling better in their life is because we have these moments of like, I'm going to do it all. And then we let ourselves down once and then we use it. We actually like ourselves less than we did for not doing it, right? Because we're like, well, I failed now. So instead, seeing everything as an experiment and just choosing one thing to experiment with that's tiny, that's realistic, that we can actually try with, and then be it. So it's being in that creation energy where it's like looking for the solutions, and looking to be playful and experiment a bit, but being able to conduct an experiment underpins it all.
And do you find that there are some times where people are just so in whatever they're in that they can't get to the space of creation and possibility and experimentation, where like there's some other work that's got to get done first to at least get back to the baseline? And so what does that look? How do you coach people on that, or what do you tell them to go and do?
Well, so it's quite interesting. So generally, I always start with, every time I'm working with someone, particularly one-on-one, I start with like a retro of where they're at right now, right? And a lot comes out in that. Then pretty much always the next thing we look at are their beliefs and their values, right? And that sounds like simple work, but so much comes out there. And I'm very good at, yes, I know quite a lot about the human experience, but I'm not a trained therapist. I'm a coach. I guess I sometimes call myself, and don't take this the wrong way, listeners, like the gateway drug to deeper work, right? So, it might be that I'm able to shine some lights and just provide some reflection markers and say, you may want to explore this further. I can make a connection, or you can, whatever, at least to support that human where they are. But it's funny you should say that, because one of the things that I really encourage people to do when we start working together is to keep like a daily micro retro, which is like I call it the sort of Bloom daily diary, where you set yourself up for success, so that either the one notification that's allowed on my phone is that day one pings me at 8:30 p.m. when I get into bed and says, how did you live today? Where did you step away? Where did I step away from myself? Where did I hold back? So that every day I'm like, okay, I'm just reflecting on how I've lived in that day, and and then tomorrow when I start the day, I don't try and do it all. I go, I didn't take very long for lunch yesterday, so maybe today I need to make sure that I bake that in. But I say all that to say, Adam, that is having this daily diary is the single biggest, hardest thing that people ever, only a handful of people have ever actually picked it up, run with it, and done it. And that doesn't mean we haven't still made amazing work coaching-wise, but I mean, it can be when you are overwhelmed in other ways. Even it might be that now wasn't the time for them to work with something like that. And that actually there may be a time in the future that, though, because they've had the idea planted, they come back to it at a time where maybe they've got the space to start living in a bit of a more iterative way, right? But you have to meet people where they are. And that means that you actually have to find the right intervention that's going to support that person with where they are in the work that they're doing with you. But then also sometimes that does mean providing a marker to other avenues that they might want to explore. I don't know if that answers. That's probably a bit waffly.
No, I think it was perfect. All right, I have one final question for you, and then we're going to get into the experiment of the week, which you may have just come up with it right now if you don't already have one top of mind. So the final question is, how do you define success today?
For me, living a successful life it means that I am constantly finding new ways to step into myself more fully. So if I can look at myself, which I absolutely can today, and say, am I loving of where I am? Yes, absolutely. But am I keeping my feet to the fire of trying to express myself more fully in this life? Yes, I am. And I think that for me, being able to live a life where I feel like myself, where I can honor myself, where I can be in alignment with my values, and all of that is the thing that sets the foundation for me being able to live a life where I'm able to feel like I'm moving towards the fullest expression of myself.
Beautiful. I love it. All right. So for our experiment of the week, since this is the Adam experiment, you and I are fans of experimentation. And anything come to mind for the people who are listening, something they can go try over the next week to help them more fully express themselves?
Maybe rather than trying to do like a whole daily diary, what if you just asked yourself the question, where did I hold back today?
Oof. Okay. So daily, pick a time, end of day-ish.
Pick a time. It's up to you. You could do it in the morning. It's just, I think it's quite good. Particularly, it depends. If you have a hyper-reactive brain like I do, it helps to get things out of it before you try to go to sleep, I find. But maybe you don't. And maybe it's better for you to just reflect on yesterday and go, where did I hold back yesterday? And then, okay, how can I express myself more fully today? Just in a tiny way, not in a big way. Not in a big way, just in a tiny way. Yeah.
One little itty bitty tiny thing.
One tiny thing, because also self-expression really is a muscle that we have to build. So you have to start in lower stakes situations and build up from there. So if you are thinking, how can I express myself more fully in the next day, go for the easier areas first before you go in for the big, hard stuff.
And I have to ask this question now because I find this fascinating, that as we get older, it feels like it becomes harder to express ourselves. Because when we were little kids, we didn't have any other choice. We just showed up fully. And then eventually, usually adults, those damn adults, were like, no, maybe not, maybe less of this, maybe more of this, dance this way, sing that way, play this thing, do better here. And that self-expression just sort of, and now it's like we have to rebuild it.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a reason why one of the first things I did, I've been married for 2 years and moved to America 2 years ago. I now live in Atlanta. No, you're probably thinking, she doesn't sound like she's in Atlanta. No, I don't, but I am. And one of the very first things that I did when I got here was found a picture of my husband and I at about the age of 3. And those two Fraggles are equal size pictures, and they are right there in our living space. Me, I am a savage. He is a cherub, right? When I was 3 years old, you couldn't tell me anything. I was like, I will, we call them jumpers. You probably call them sweaters. I was like, these are trousers. They are not to be worn on the top half. They're to be worn on the bottom half. And you can't tell me otherwise. And I would just put the jumper on, as we call it, and walk around. And whereas he was this angelic little cherub, we both forgot that about ourselves. He forgot his joy. I forgot my sass. And so in fact, homework number 2 find a picture of yourself that captures you at your absolute essence before the world crept in. And I mean, okay, some people tell me that they managed to hold on to themselves till they were like 6 or 7. I would argue, I think we lose ourselves much sooner. We lose ourselves really young. So find either the savage, the cherub, whatever you were, and know that that's who your soul still wants to be.
And we'll end on that. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, Ruth. That was incredible. I enjoyed it. I hope you also had a good time.
Oh, I loved it. And I love this. I'm so happy that you're doing this. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me today.
Of course. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in today on this episode of The Atom Experiment. If you're enjoying this episode and want more, I'm sure you figured out by now how to subscribe to this podcast. Would love to have you along. Of course, the review would also mean the world to me. If you're interested in hearing more about the topics related to how we can unlock and unleash our ultimate potential, then I definitely recommend you stop by atomexperiment.com to go and sign up. There's a newsletter that goes out multiple times per week. It's also where you'll get the latest and greatest on the podcast and where I share some of my personal stories, my personal experiments, and other learnings throughout the week for you to follow along and hopefully find some things that you can experiment with on your own. Thanks again for tuning in today. I hope you have an incredible day and look forward to having you back next time on The Atom Experiment.